يلا can start. Well, let's start, please.
No.
Okay, we're starting, and first of all, thank you for being here. Thank you for attending. We see a lot of new faces. Welcome, everyone. For those of you who are not aware of what we are doing, this is a new platform, a joint collaboration between the Department of History and Archaeology, the Arabic Department, and the Center for Arab and Middle Eastern Studies. It's called the Thamarat al-Funun as a tribute to the Beiruti newspaper of the 19th century, and it's a platform to give scholars and graduate students, most importantly, a platform to share their work and solicit feedback and ideas. So we have the absolute pleasure of hosting today Professor Michael Provence, who I don't think needs any introduction, but just as a formality. He teaches modern Middle Eastern history, focusing on the 20th century, the Arab East. He received his BA in history from Berkeley in 1994 and PhD from University of Chicago in 2001. I won't go to cite all his affiliations, but his recent publications include the books called The Great Syrian Revolt and the Rise of Arab Nationalism in 2005, and his latest work, The Last Ottoman Generation and the Making of the Modern Middle East in 2017, both available in Arabic and in Turkish. Provence lived and studied over the course of many years in several Middle Eastern countries. He's a great friend of AUB and the Department of History, and he lived in Lebanon and Syria between 1998 and 2006. So join me in welcoming Professor Provence and we have lunch boxes, so don't forget if you... So join me in welcoming Professor Provence, and then we'll give the floor to Professor Makram, who will lead the discussion and open it for questions and comments. So thank you.
So I start?
Yeah, you start.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for this kind introduction, and thank you for coming, everybody. It's always a treat and a great pleasure to be here. I love to come back home to AUB, and it's nice that this has been a pretty terrible year, but I think that things are in some ways more optimistic than they've been for a long time. So, and there's reason to be hopeful, which is a new experience, I think, for many of us. So it's especially wonderful to be here and to take part in Thamarat al-Funun. My thought today is to present there was a circular or a piece of a book proposal and some other stuff that Barak sent around. So I'm presenting a book idea, and I'm introducing you to my protagonist, the person around whom I plan or I think I will structure the argument and the book. And I think I found an incredibly good protagonist, fabulously interesting, far more than I expected, also inspirational, actually, for reasons that I hope will become clear. And so, I want to see if it sounds like it's going to work. That's my that's my request for you. This book, like my last books, both of them really, will be AUB products and products of the History and Archaeology Department. I've been inspired and guided over the decades, actually, by dear friends here, and that's one. I love the place, I love this institution, and I love my friends, some of whom are departed now. and to give, the work and life itself, to me, meaning. So, it's also important to point out that this book, Makram, I think, should have the word miracle attached to his name. Last May I was here, and I was hunting bookshops and looking for traces of Faris Bey, and he said, let's go find them. Well, they weren't present. And so he said, I'll get them to you. The Lebanese Post? Wow. So about a month later, I'm going to say something about the Postal Service, too, here in a few minutes.
Even though you send your postcards.
That's right. I do always, Amini knows I always go to the Liban Post on Hamra, and I send postcards. And they arrive. They always arrive. Sometimes it takes months. It's also, I feel a little guilty about this, because probably most of you don't know this, but if you send a postcard, it's going to cost like 2,500 Lebanese pounds for a Fairuz stamp to go to the United States. Somebody's paying the extra, and it's not me. So I don't know who's paying the extra, and I think it's probably the honorable Lebanese citizen. So I thank you for that. My father got his postcard. It took about 4 months, but it got there. He got it in July. So anyway, but Makram performed a miracle, and so about a month or two later, I got a telephone call, and Inas Khansa of the Arabic department was on the phone, and she said, "I'm right down the street, and I have your books from Makram." She was there for a wedding, so I got on my bicycle and I went and I collected the awraq of Faris al Khuri. So that's without his help, I wouldn't be here.
We got them from Damascus.
I know. I mean, it's really, like I say, miracle. So, all right. So it's a collective enterprise. That's my point here. So this time, I'm writing about this is in a way, I plan a sequel to my last book about the end of the Ottoman period, the mandates in the region generally. And so this book is my idea, my thought is to write about the end of the mandates, the crazy and completely unbelievable events of the Second World War. In the middle of the Second World War, when Britain and the United States were really fighting for survival, not only as empires, but as countries, Charles de Gaulle and Winston Churchill were exchanging multi-page handwritten letters over the composition of the Lebanese parliament. I'm not kidding. So you would think they might have had something better to do, but apparently not. They were obsessed, de Gaulle in particular, but also Churchill, with the electoral list and whose candidates would be allowed to run in Lebanon in the middle of the Second World War. Before D-Day, before the invasion of France, before all that stuff. I found this absolutely mind-boggling, unbelievable. So that's something that's going in there. When France left in 1946, it was because of a battle, left Damascus, Syria that is, it was because of a battle between Charles de Gaulle and Churchill, which is also a bit, hidden, I would say, and there's some interesting things about that. The Americans came and built a big new embassy in Abu Romani, it's still there, and an ambassadorial palace, also still there, and from that location in 1949, engineered a coup that overthrew the elected Syrian government of Faris al Khuri in 1949 after less than 3 years of democratic independence. So these are the events that I'm writing about. I've got the details, I've got the sources, I've got the smoking guns to the extent that they exist. Smoking guns don't really ever exist, but you can get close. So anyway, so the life and the adventures of Faris al Khuri span the times. But actually, his life was bigger than the topic of the book. And one of the things I want to do today is to share some of those incredible stories that I have discovered recently that probably won't make it into the book because they're too early or not exactly related. And so I wanted to share those. And so, from the perspective of his birth in 1877, he was probably an unlikely world leader. So Faris al Khuri was born in 1877, and he died in 1962. He was born in Al Kafir, near Hasbaya, in Wadi Taim, in what is very close to today's Syrian border. For some reason, and we have an expert here who may be able to tell us at a later point when we have our discussion. But for some reason, the family were Presbyterians, and so he went to the Sidon Boys' School and was a beloved, very popular, and very talented student there in the 1880s. In 1890, he graduated, and he was sent by the people who were running the school to teach elementary school in Zahle, probably as a 15-year-old, as a very young person. And apparently he met a businessman, a Lebanese or Syrian businessman who was migrating to the United States, who said, "I'm going to take you with me and educate you." And his mother said, "No, you're my oldest son. I don't want you to go. Don't go." And so he received from the principal at the Syrian Boys' School a letter of introduction to the Syrian Protestant College, and he resolved to enter the Syrian Protestant College, probably also supported by this family that had taken an interest in him. But there was an Ottoman cholera outbreak, and the road to Damascus or to Beirut was closed. He couldn't pass it. And so he walked from Zahle, where he was an elementary school teacher, to Kafir, to Sidon, where he borrowed a donkey along with his friend Said Abu Jamra, and then they walked from Saida to Beirut, where he entered the Syrian Protestant College. And then in Beirut, he took his letter and he was admitted, and he met a person in his first class whose name was a teacher named Najib Salibi, the grandfather of the great historian of the History and Archaeology department, Kamal Salibi. And Najib Salibi took him around and said, "This is a great student. He's very talented. Take good care of him, and make sure he gives you his best." And so in this way, he was introduced into the world of the mind at this institution. And of course, that detail is also courtesy of Makram, since I knew that Dr. Salibi's father was Suleiman, but I didn't know the name of his grandfather. And Makram confirmed, indeed, that was Dr. Salibi's grandfather. So he won prizes for Arabic and for poetry, and he became and was in fact a lifelong poet who in Damascus sometimes had hundreds of people listening to his poetry recitations of the poetry that he wrote. And at some point before he completed his studies, he was sent by the missionaries here back to Saida to teach missionaries there Arabic, which he did. He resumed his studies here in 1896. And he received his BA with very high marks, very, very fast, about a third of the normal time to complete all of his studies during this period of time. And Daniel Bliss hired him to teach math and Arabic in the preparatory school. Okay. Now, I have a lot of detail here, and I'm not sure how much of it is important. It's all fascinating to me. Is it fascinating so far?
Yes.
Okay. So I won't leave out the details. But we also have a time limit here.
I mean, we're good on time.
Okay, all right. I mean, I don't want to miss this, there's, all right. So, in 1899, he went to Damascus and was hired to be the editor of the Cairo edition of Al-Muqtataf, the scientific magazine. But there was another outbreak of plague in Egypt, and so he wasn't able to take this job. And there were, in his memoirs and his papers and things, there's these moments that he calls, or Hanaf Habaz, who is his friend and kind of chronicler, says these are turning points. So this is one of those turning points. He was stuck in Damascus. That may have been why he didn't, I hope I don't offend anybody, become Lebanese. He became Syrian. Charles is smiling, so I know I've hit the mark there. In Damascus, he became a teacher and started working in Orthodox schools, but also at the famous Damascus Sultani School. They don't call it the Sultani School in Damascus, although it is the Sultani School, like the Sultani School here, Maktab Anbar. So he taught there. And he also got a job as a translator for the British consulate, which turned out to be a very good job. And he also became, and Madame Hind Tome, Faris's grandniece, has given me this photograph which shows all of his siblings. He was the oldest. At some point, his father died, and he became responsible for all of them. And there's a note that he also became a salesman for the Gresham Life Insurance Company. And in 1 year, he was able to sell enough life insurance policies that he earned 1,200 Ottoman gold pounds. And he was very pleased that this was enough to ensure the education of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 siblings. So I think we can say that he was a self-made man, not like some of the people who claim to be self-made men, but the real thing for sure. In something like 1908 or 1909, he married Asma bint Jibril Aid of Haifa, and they had a son, Suhail, who is the father of Colette, the famous Syrian novelist. And during this period of time, he started studying other languages by himself. French, and Ottoman, Turkish, and law. And he became, over a period of time, a self-taught legal scholar, we can say. And he was, a successful person in Damascene society and was well known and became quite popular among lots of people within the city. He was sought after as a host and a poet and a party guest, obviously. And in this period of time, at the close of the Ottoman Empire, the parties were great, or so the sources tell us. He was invited to all of them, apparently. And he also became a political person. And after the restoration of the Ottoman constitution in 1908, Faris, along with his friend and fellow Syrian Protestant College graduate, Dr. Abdurrahman Shahbander, who had been one of the student activists who had begun the fight against compulsory chapel at the Syrian Protestant College. They founded the first branch of the Ottoman Unionist Party in Damascus in 1908, immediately after the constitutional restoration. Faris was present at Shahbander's. Of course, Shahbander became pretty much the most famous Damascene politician of the first half of the 20th century until he was assassinated in the souk in 1940. And he witnessed the first speech launching Dr. Shahbander's career. Faris was eventually able to deliver speeches in Ottoman Turkish and in French, including in the Ottoman Parliament. He wrote and published an epic poem of 500 verses, which was published in Cairo, about the Russo-Japanese War of 1904. This was big news in those days because a Western imperial power had been defeated by Eastern people. And this was something that really made. So he wrote poems, published poems eulogizing the Ottoman pilots that were killed after flying to Damascus. They're buried next to Salahuddin Ayyubi and Yassin al-Hashimi, next to the Umayyad Mosque. He decided that he was going to enter an Ottoman election. And so he enjoyed British consular protection, but he quit his job and he gave up Ottoman consular protection and his rights as British consular protection. And he in 1914, at 40, he nominated himself for the Ottoman Parliament, and he ran. And there was, in the Ottoman Parliament list, there was quotas for non-Muslims. They were not like the electoral system that came with the mandate both in Lebanon and Syria, but there were quotas for non-Muslims. There was no quota for Presbyterians, and so he ran in the normal list against Ottoman Muslims of famous families, and he won. And so he went to Istanbul and learned. He said he learned the law in the Ottoman Parliament. He entered the Ottoman Law Academy in Istanbul and began the process of becoming an accredited lawyer, but he didn't finish. He was actually, during the course of his life, never an accredited lawyer. He didn't get a law degree from any institution, and he became the founder and the president of the Damascus University Law Faculty, and the president of the Damascus Bar, and a member of the International Rights Committee of the United Nations without a law degree. He also wrote a bunch of books and codified Syrian law by translating books from English and French to Arabic, and devising an entire vocabulary, legal vocabulary for the practice of law in Syria, which is still used until today. In Istanbul, Talat Pasha convinced him to rejoin the Ottoman Unionist Party, which he did, but he worked in the Ottoman Parliament against Turkish chauvinism, the Turkifying policies of the central state at the time. He became an institutionalist, which I think is very important. And for his entire life, and in all of his works, he advocated the rights of citizens, the construction and protection of transparent, fair, and open public institutions. And he was a great and talented lawyer who knew how to argue a case on any side, it must be said, like any talented lawyer. But as far as he was concerned, and it's very clear, there was only ever one right side, and he was inevitably on it. He insisted that the law serve to protect everyone, not only the rich and the well-connected, and that the law existed to protect the rights of citizens against the power of capital and the power of the state when needed. Okay? As an MP in the Ottoman Parliament, he lamented that out of 22 million Ottoman citizens, 10.5 were Arabs, 7.5 million were Turks, and yet the Parliament of 245, this is an early charge against proportional representation. The Parliament of 245 deputies had 150 Turks, or people from Anatolia, and 60 from Bilad al-Sham, or from the Arab provinces. He delivered a scathing speech in Turkish on the poor condition of the public services in the Arab provinces. He said, "The postal service is no good. Spies open the letters. Decent citizens pay postage, and sometimes their letters never arrive. And everybody has to rely on the Ottoman telegraph service, except for, and the Ottoman citizens are proud of the institution, but they are served by people who are recruited and hired, who may not understand or be able to compose telegrams in the Ottoman language, and consequently citizens pay for telegrams that are incomprehensible, illegible, and pure gibberish. This was a popular point. He also, and we talked about this, demanded in Parliament to know the circumstances of two famous Armenian deputies who were disappeared and subsequently murdered in absence during the course of the First World War. And he publicly, in Parliament, questioned Talat Pasha on the fate of these two deputies. He was asked privately to withdraw the question and not embarrass the government, which he refused to do. And so since he refused to withdraw the question, he resolved to not attend a session in which the question would be raised. No one else took it up, and the government was in that way let off the hook. So I think I'm gonna speed ahead here. This is a kind of an important anecdote from his life that I'm going to mention because it's particularly relevant to our contemporary circumstances here in Lebanon. Faris noted with approval, great approval, the intervention of his colleague, whose name you maybe have heard, Salim Ali Salam, deputy of Wilayat Beirut. This is, of course, the great-great-grandfather of the prime minister, if I'm not mistaken. Great-great-grandfather? Great-grandfather. Salim Ali Salam said in the Ottoman Parliament on July 14, 1914, the Ottoman Ministry of Education hired teachers for the noble Arabic language whose knowledge is no greater than any person on the street. The state appoints ignorant school directors who are incompetent and corrupt and failures at school management. Consequently, our enrollment numbers decline as others grow. Our state institutions wither for lack of support and function. Our Sultani school in Beirut, which I visited yesterday, by the way, it's now the Makassib Girls' School, was established 30 years ago, but its students do not exceed 200, while the number of students in the American college is 1,100. And the Jesuit college, that's Saint Joseph, the number is 700. The French Republic funds schools in Syria that have 43,000 students. The Rome Orthodox schools have 35,000 students, not counting Italian, German, American, and others. So if the number of students in public schools is far fewer than in foreign and religious school, you realize the danger that threatens the country. This is Salim Ali Salam in 1914. Faris al Khuri approves to the extent that he included it in his memoirs. In 1916, Faris was summoned to, during summer recess for the parliament. He came to Damascus and he was arrested at the Victoria Hotel in Damascus, in downtown Damascus. Now it's where Jisr Victoria is, near Sahat Merje. And he was interrogated by Jamal Pasha himself and mistreated, and he defended himself, ultimately successfully. He accused another Ottoman parliamentary deputy, Asad Shukairi, who was the deputy of Akka, who's also the father of Yusuf, Ahmed Shukairi, the founder of the PLO, or the first Secretary General of the PLO. He accused him of being behind his punishment or persecution, we can say, from Jamal Pasha. So anyway, he was in prison for 4 months. He had endorsements from Talat Pasha and from Anwar Pasha that he brought with him. Jamal was not interested. And he said that and he was interrogated repeatedly and left in prison. He was finally released and managed to basically argue his way out in December of 1917. So he was in prison for a year and a half in Damascus from Jamal Pasha. He said Ottoman prison was bad, but the authorities were upright and proper, and at least they actually were after something. French prison, by contrast, in which he experienced as well, was worse and was accompanied by contemptuous speech and behavior and a general pointlessness of the abuse. prison abuse. But Shakib Arslan was partly responsible for his release, probably. Jamal said, "Okay, you have to leave." He went to Istanbul and came back in after the collapse of the Ottoman defense in 1918. During the time of Faisal's regime, Faisal's government, he was the Minister of Finance in Faisal's government. Yusuf al-Azmi entrusted his daughter Leila to Faris al Khuri when he went to fight in Maysalun and was subsequently martyred there in July of 1919. So I think, you know, you've got the outlines. I want to mention one other thing. He was a founder and the vice president of the Hizb al-Shab, the People's Party, by Abdurrahman Shabander in 1925, when High Commissioner al-Sarai briefly legalized political parties in Syria, and in August 27th, during a secret meeting at the house of Osman Sharabati in, I think, Sahat al-Nus, probably, there was a secret party meeting to support the Great Syrian Revolt, and the French Mandate Intelligence raided it, and some of them escaped. I think Osman Sharbati was imprisoned, and Faris al Khuri was sent to Ottawa Island off Tartus for 76 days in the prison there during this time. Oh yes, and the other thing I wanted to mention is that according to French intelligence, when after they were arrested and put in prison, their wives and female relatives, who are regretfully not named in the intelligence records, they're just called Madame Sharabati, Madame Shahbander, continued their agitation and activism. And based on the transcripts by the spies, the ladies were a lot tougher and more than their husbands and male relatives had been during this period of the Great Syrian Revolt, which is definitely a fun fact of history, I think. He was part of the founder of the National Bloc. Could I see the next slide, Charles, please? Okay. I like these pictures here. Back to the first one, maybe. So, you know, we're all getting older, and sometimes, you know, I look in the mirror and I think to myself, it's not the way it used to be. And so I found Faris's transition here, you know, from a striking tarbouche-wearing student gentleman to a kind of an old guy behind a desk, you know. Next slide, please, for us. To be, you know, but, what's the next one here? Okay, so here we are. This is where I want to save something for a minute. During the 1930s, Faris al Khuri was the dean of the Damascus University Law School and the president of the bar. And the French mandate issued a law, the High Commissioner issued a law to exclude him based on the fact that he was from a sect which was too small to be represented, which he and his friends thought was devised precisely to exclude him personally from, so no Presbyterians, from the Syrian parliament. In the 1930s, Damascus was getting its water from the Barada River, which was causing continual outbreaks of health problems, and people were getting sick and even dying from unsafe water. And so the mandate authorities engineered or sent out a proposal for a concession to take water from the Wadi Barada, from Ain Fije, from the spring, the main spring of the Barada, and bring it directly to Damascus so that the city would be endowed with clean, pure, fresh water. But they wanted to sell this, or to write this so that it was a French concession, and Faris al Khuri was the advisor to the mayor, and the mayor said, "I've got this proposal, I want you to look at it." And so Faris took the French proposal, which of course he could read ably, despite his completely, what an accomplishment. I'm struggling with French, and I must say without a teacher, anyway. But you know, I don't do homework, and apparently I need my teachers. I don't know, some of us are. Anyway, so Faris took the proposal and wrote a counter proposal on the back of the sheets of paper, and they gave it back to the High Commissioner, and the High Commissioner was furious because he said, "What did he do? He wrote all of this stuff on the back of my paper, and now we can't, ignore what he said." So the proposal there was also a proposal from some wealthy merchants in Damascus, and their plan was to bring water to 5,000 houses, not modest houses, I think we can say, and to get each of the householders to pay 30 gold Ottoman pounds, I think once or maybe per year, we don't know, I don't know, in order to provide this, and then maybe later on they would expand it. And Faris said, "No, we have to reject this. This is absolutely not okay, and the concession is not okay." And those of you who attended the talk I gave last week probably know who would have been the president of the concession if there hadn't been a concession. Yes, Robert the case, for sure. But Faris destroyed it. And so he presented to the committee a proposal for a publicly owned municipal water project to furnish water to every structure building as a basic right that came with the parcel in the entire city, paid by general public prescription. So everybody paid a little, and everybody had water in the entire city. I drank a lot of Ain Fige water. It was always refreshing, always healthy. I also visited Ain Fige itself. I went on the train, in fact, the Ottoman train. That was a long time ago. But it was, I think, and remains, and had been for a long time, a point of pride among, and this is the building in Merge of the Ain Fige Water Authority. It's still there. You can visit it. It's beautiful, and it is a jewel of municipal, enlightened municipal governance and ensuring the public good. Of course, I should also say that in December of 2016, the Syrian Air Force bombed the Ain Fige water and destroyed it, depriving 5.5 million Damascenes of water. And that was probably an order given by the president himself, which I think is not a trivial point to be made. So that's an interesting contrast between the leadership and the selfless efforts of somebody like Faris al Khuri and some of the other types of leadership that we have had. Okay, now next slide, please, Charles. I'm getting ready to finish up here. Oh, and there's a picture of Faris with his granddaughter Paulette in 1937 that I put in just because it's a nice picture. This is from Sami Mubayed's website, by the way. These are from the United Nations. So in 1945, he went on a plane at the age of 68. It took a week from Damascus to go to San Francisco for the inaugural meeting of the United Nations. While he was there, General de Gaulle brought Syrian or French soldiers, landed them in Beirut, marched them to Damascus, tried to impose a treaty on the Syrians, and subsequently ordered the shelling of the Damascus parliament, the killing of probably 1,000 demonstrators on the streets of Damascus. At the same time, Faris al Khuri was, roughly the same time Faris al Khuri was in San Francisco, arguing for the rights not only of Syrians to have their own country and their own citizenship, but of people of the entire world, and equality of nations and of citizens everywhere. In a session chaired by Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov, he gave a rousing defense, and he said, "We are ready to make a treaty with France, but only on the terms we would sign with the United States, Russia, Britain, or any other country." And he said, "Cooperation between peoples must increase, but as modern communications, back in those days he was talking about telephones, shrank the world with, wires, peace would depend on justice. He said the United Nations would be a success, but only if it was proven to act to restrain the powerful against the weak, to defend the rights of the downtrodden, and to restrain the great powers in their machinations against people who were not able to defend themselves on the same level. The speech made him internationally famous. He was invited to Los Angeles. He got an honorary degree from the University of Southern California, which has a pretty bad reputation these days. But in those days I feel sorry for my friends who worked there, really. I made sure my son didn't consider it.
What motivates the bad reputation?
They're corrupt. They're very, very corrupt. They take money from everybody, and they let, like all these Hollywood stars, pay to get their kids who had never attended a single class in high school and flunked every test to get them admitted. So that's the bad reputation. It's a fairly pointless digression. Is that okay? I think it's a pointless. Yeah. All right. So finally, so I want to close, and I've taken more time than I should have taken here. It's been like I say, it's been a bad year, and over the course of the year, on the campus of the university I teach, at the University of California, where our student protesters were arrested and taken off to jail, and I have often thought that, I should have done more. I should have, not thought about whether or not my next promotion was going to get destroyed by the chancellor, whether I might get fired. I should have. And I've been reading about Faris, and I thought he seemed never to be worried. He went to jail. He got fired. They wrote a letter. They wrote a law. The High Commissioner wrote a law in 1936 to fire Faris and Fayez from their jobs as professors of Damascus University, and deprived them of their livelihood in 1936 because they were involved in the general strike. So they were targeted, they were fired, they were imprisoned again and again and again, and they didn't quit. And so, for me anyway, he's an example and an inspiration for these times and probably for any times. So last slide, Charles, and this is the final anecdote, and this is where the title comes from of the talk, which was, let's see, where did I say it was? They all left, but we remained. So, anybody know this palace? This is a palace in Damascus which nobody's ever seen because it was behind closed walls for many decades. And so I'm going to tell you a story about the palace and about Faris. This palace was liberated in December, and people visited it for the first time. Syrians visited it for the first time in anyone's living memory, I would say. Okay? So this is the palace of Hussein Nazim Pasha, Wali Hussein Nazim Pasha, who was the Ottoman Wali in the late 19th century. It's in Muhajirin. Sometimes it's called the Muhajirin Palace. In August 7th, 1920, General Gouraud made his first visit after Maysalun to Damascus. And when he went to Maysalun, he inhabited this palace, which he had seized from the owners immediately before and occupied. And it became the palace of the High Commissioner in Damascus, like there's a palace for the High Commissioner here in Beirut. And about 2 weeks right after the entry, General Gouraud, the High Commissioner, announced a banquet in the palace. And he invited all of the members of Faisal's government who were still there, and all the ministers, and all the notable citizens of Damascus to a banquet in this palace, which also was the personal home of Bashar al-Assad, which, if you haven't already figured that out. And Gouraud, the palace has a view from those upper windows of the Ghouta and the whole city and the Barada and the road to Beirut and everything. And like I say, nobody I know has ever seen even the outside of the palace since probably 1960. So Gouraud gave a banquet, and he's got all these people around the table, and he looks out the window, and he says, wow, now this is a view. It's amazing. It's extraordinary. Magnifique. And then he says to Faris, is this the palace where your king Faisal lived? Did you let was King Faisal? He lived here, did he? He's gone. Faris said, and this is testified in a couple of locations. He says, "Yes, Your Excellency. This is the palace where King Faisal lived, and it was built by an Ottoman governor named Nazim Pasha. And after Nazim Pasha, General Jamal Pasha lived here. And after Jamal Pasha lived here, General Allenby lived here. And after General Allenby lived here, King Faisal lived here. And now you. We dined with all of them here. We dined with all of them in this grand palace. And they're all gone. The palace is still here. And we're still here. And they're all gone." And
So
apparently,
special. Yes. So special.
precisely so. And so Faris, the meal proceeded, and no one said a word. There was no more speech for the entire, no more discussion. There was dead silence for the entirety of the meal. And General Gouraud had no response. That said, there's no answer to such a question, which isn't a question. So, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Before we start, given that Michael is a historian on Jabal al-Druze and hospitality is a must, I would like to insist that people who are not fasting, please help yourself before we continue. Thank you very much, Michael, for this very interesting talk. And I would open up the floor to questions or comments. And I would also like to know more about the role he played at the UN, because from the proposal you sent us, it seems that the Americans for a while did bet on someone like Faris al Khuri becoming their partner in the new Middle East. But all of a sudden you transition into the Hasn al-Zaim.
Yeah.
So did Faris and his cohort actually understand the so-called Cold War politics that was forming, or they were just part of the old Ottoman generation who just simply died out?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I mean, my answer is probably not very satisfying, and I'm sorry about that, because this is a very early project. The book's not written, the chapters are not written. I circulated a proposal, which is, I wrote one chapter last month. I don't know enough because I'm still reading the sources. The UN, I mean, I think probably, so like the Potsdam conference, takes place a few months after this period I mean, supposedly Truman, and this is another thing I haven't found. I mean, one of the things that Faris did was he was the writer, along with Faris al Khuri, another law professor, of the Syrian Constitution of 1930. And he is apparently, legendarily, the person who put the clause that the president must be a Muslim, despite the fact that he's a Presbyterian. So, there's things to track down. Truman was supposed to have said, after listening to the speech, "How could such a people not be free?" And then said something very obscene about the organs of certain French leaders, let us say. put it as delicately as possible. I haven't confirmed that.
So would you say that because if we go to the San Francisco conference, and I always like to remind non-AOites about this, at this convention there were 22 people present. Out of these 22, 19 of them signed the charter, including Faris. So if we had this much people from the, I think, 54 people present, so we had almost a blocking third in a way. So these people, were they...
You mean AUBites?
AUBites, yeah, AUBites, or Syrian Protestant Collegeites, maybe.
Yeah.
So do these people understand their role with the West, or were they basically, quote-unquote, Syrian intellectuals who never made this across the Atlantic? Is this something that you might want to explore?
Well, so, I mean, for Faris, I think what we need to think about is that the League of Nations had excluded them. And so from the beginning of the League of Nations and the settlement in 1920, there were all of these great legal minds and people like Shakib Arslan and Faris al Khuri and others who insisted on their right to represent themselves. And they were denied endlessly by the League of Nations from 1920 until the end of the League of Nations in 1939. They never had a single opportunity to actually represent themselves in Geneva, not once. Not in front of the Mandates Commission, not in front of the General Assembly, never. So when this invitation came, they took it. And you know, so there was Philip Khoury's mother was there as a Lebanese representative, also an AUB graduate, Angela Jordouk Khoury, not a relative, and Shah Malik, yes, and others. So I mean, you know, they were, I think, determined to represent themselves in the first instance and to make a claim for equality on the world stage, full stop. That was the program, I would say. And the contours of the Cold War had not been revealed to anybody.
Questions? Yes, please. Can you identify yourself and ask questions?
I want to ask you, did you know that when my uncle was in New York, in the United Nations, he was sitting, waiting for the session to begin, and there was somebody waiting for him. You know that story, the French one. And he kept telling him, Mr. Khoury, this is my place. And Mr. Khoury kept looking at his watch, not saying what, not moving. And after 22 minutes, he got up and he told him, now you can sit. He told him, why are you doing this? He said, you stayed in my country 22 years. I cannot stay in your seat 22 minutes.
That's a great story.
He had many stories like this.
Yeah. So did you hear this story? Did you hear this story firsthand?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
How did you read the story?
I know him. I know the story. I mean, we were.
So
My father was in
famous,
Washington as
yeah.
ambassador, and he was in New York as a representative. And my father went to New York to be in the Syrian group of at the United Nations. This is the microphone.
Yes.
I thought something to eat.
So my question was going to be, how can we confirm the story? But you took care of it. It's finished. I think it's confirmed. It's going in the book. So thank you.
Questions? Yes. Identify yourself, please.
My name is Nadim Azzar. History graduate from Beirut. I'm interested to know, what was Mr. Khoury's reaction to the rise of ideas like Arab nationalism, like Syrian nationalism in the early part of the 20th century?
Yeah, it's a good question. He was a indefatigable Arab nationalist, full stop. He was also a great admirer and an advocate for the glories of Islamic civilization. So, like when he was in the Ottoman Parliament, he gave a public poem on the splendors of Salahuddin in Istanbul during the course of the First World War. So, I mean, this is he was I think very clear from what I understand and from what I see in his positions and his. Of course, he was also he had been an Ottoman patriot and wanted a better Ottoman state that was more representative. And I think, found these things completely compatible to be an Arab nationalist, an Ottomanist, a Presbyterian, a advocate, a tireless and completely principled advocate for human rights, with no compromises whatsoever. It's completely clear. So, does that answer the question?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Professor.
I just wanted to add here that Arab nationalism at the time, at least 1920 to 1940, did not mean Arab nationalism like we understand it today.
No.
It did not include Egypt, for example. It barely included. Egypt came within the sphere of Arab nationalism much later.
Yeah.
It did not include really the Arabian Peninsula. Iraq was an ambiguous case, so it was a very different concept of Arab nationalism. Arab nationalism evolved in different periods and different stages and came to mean different things completely. So just to respond a bit to your question, and apart from that, I have a small comment on a sort of megalomania conceit of the Lebanese. The Lebanese always think that all the great powers are really preoccupied in each and every day with Lebanese affairs. And unfortunately, your small anecdote with which you started between Churchill and de Gaulle during World War II only confirmed.
Yeah. Well, what do you? I mean, so I need some advice. Well, okay. Let me put it differently. And in this way, I may reveal some of my deeper ideological commitments as a person. I would not say that in this case, they were arguing about the Lebanese parliament, but what they were really interested in was Damascus. So I think that's what.
And because of Lebanon, of course.
Well. You wouldn't say I should leave that out, though, would you think? I mean, okay.
I'm just being facetious.
No, I know it's an excellent joke. As far as Arab nationalism is concerned, and thank you very much for this because it's a very important point. They're talking. The quote, the position, the phrase is Syrian unity. That's it, and it's in there. It's in the entirety of his work and his corpus and his life. Syrian unity. So if there's no Ottoman Empire and it's a disaster and it's finished, Syrian unity is the goal, is the hope. It can be changeable based on what's possible, like any political person does.
Further.
There's a question back there.
Yes, we'll get there.
Thanks for this amazing presentation on Faris al Khuri. I always love how there's these people at the center of your stories and how you tell their stories. And so I'm wondering, what is the place of Faris al Khuri in the broader narrative that you may wish to deal with in the book? Or what are some questions that you're trying to answer through his life? I know that you're still writing or researching, but any thoughts?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm a little worried about it because I don't have an argument as far as I can tell, other than so the two books that I wrote in the past, they had real arguments and things that I wanted to prove and things that I wanted to demolish. Whether I succeeded or not is a different question. But I had targets, you know, I had things that I wanted to challenge in terms of historiographical ideas. And this one, you know, I mean, I'm not sure if I have an argument at this point. I mean, I have the proof of the Syrian of the CIA coup, and it's been something that people have talked about for a long time. But I have the proof,
which will be published in our proceedings for the Truth Conference very soon.
Well, that's there. I've got more proof than I had then, Makram, but you're not going to get all of it yet. So you know, I think, I mean, it's a really difficult question that I can't answer. I think he's a wonderful protagonist and a fabulously interesting person, and a person of great inspiration, actually. And I'm not going to be writing about this stuff with these. I mean, there's all this material. So if anybody's interested, you know, if you want to know about what Jamal Pasha did in Damascus in 1916, I can help. I'm not going to be writing about it. I'm interested in the later period now. So I don't know. I mean, do I need an argument to tell a story? I'm not sure.
Let's go for our friend. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Shall I have the fluffy
Yeah.
microphone? Yeah. Okay. So Johannes Wardenberg, thanks again, Professor Provence, for the presentation. Well, you talk about Syrian unity. Does that mean Bilad al-Sham?
Yes.
I mean, so it relates to Palestine too?
Yeah.
Okay.
But then it changes, and it changes based on different things. And so, I mean, from the perspective of Faris al Khuri and 1936 in the Syrian Treaty, Syrian unity means no separate French-sponsored. The French government, what happens, and I didn't talk about this, but I talked a little bit about it the other night. The treaty negotiations in 1936 take place. The Faris al Khuri and Ghazi have written the Constitution. The High Commissioner says, "Write it. We'll approve it." And then Paris says, "Absolutely not. No way." And then they put a final clause in the treaty or in the Constitution that says the High Commissioner can overturn any part of this at any time for any reason, anytime he likes. And that's the last clause of the treaty. And then he says, "And I'm unilaterally declaring the treaty." So that happens, and then they go. I'm kind of losing track of your question. Syrian unity. So in the treaty negotiations, the French government want to retain, Lebanon separately, the state of the Alawites separately, and Jabal Druze separately, the state of Aleppo separately, and the state of Damascus separately. And if they could make things smaller, they would have. So when he's talking about Syrian unity in 1936, he's talking about, none of those little statelets, none of those mini states. Lebanon is different, maybe depending on what Riyad al-Soleh, who is a member of the National Bloc, and some of his pals want or insist on. Salim al-Islam, says, no, we're not really interested in a separate state. Riyad al-Soleh says the same thing, then kind of changes his mind. So, Syrian unity is a flexible idea. But what it really means at that time is no more colonial partitions, I would say.
And if possible, I just want to comment on the question of Arab nationalism. I mean, I'm in no way specialist, obviously, but I mean, I remember of the secret societies which were put up under the Ottoman period, which were also based in Egypt. And, the Hashemonites, they really obviously saw Iraq part of the picture too. I mean, there was a question of Egypt, of course, which was under British rule. But just to say that Iraq and Egypt were not involved in a broader project of Arab unity, I would be more careful about that. But I mean, I'm not an expert.
Well, let's say Ottoman Arab states. Egypt is separate, after 1882. So, you know, the Iraqis are also kind of part of the I mean, there's a period in 1936 where people really think that the British and the French are leaving and the borders are going away. All of them. And, you know, they have reason to be that optimistic for a brief period of time, which is a quite tragic story, I think, actually.
Well,
thank you. This is fascinating. I'm not a historian, so I always find these fascinating. My name is Wael Mansour. So, I have two questions. So, as a unionist, was he opposing the independence of Lebanon or the creation of Lebanon? So, what was his stance? And then the second part, I think, what is fascinating is he played a big part at the UN in 1947, 1948 during the Arab-Israeli First War. And there are anecdotes, I don't know if they're confirmed, that he was actually calling for the Egyptian army and the Syrian army not to stop and take the ceasefire as a first round, because he saw that that was a chance for the Israeli groups to get the arms. So how true is it? I mean, it's very interesting. This
48
during the war of the Nakba.
Yeah.
So when the Arab armies attacked, it is said that he played the role in order for them to keep the pressure. Is it true? Or?
I don't know. I mean, I want to find out, and I haven't done the work yet. But that's important, and it's a thank you very much, because it's an excellent clue that I will investigate. I don't know what his role in the Nakba war was. I don't know. I mean, he was still in the government, and you know, the army blamed the civilians, and that's one of the reasons it was. I mean, Hosni Zaim wasn't only the CIA, and that's his theme too. That, you know, the armies lose the war and the civilians get the blame, and the government gets less transparent and representative for that transition. So, you know, I mean, I'll check back. Yeah.
one last question. Tfadal.
So it's a very Syrian-based account.
Story.
Yeah, and greater Syrian. And I think you need to bring Iraq in more, simply because they were the sponsors of the movements for unity.
Yeah.
And my question directly to you would be, Abdurrahman Shah Bandar was prominently pro-Hashemite and pro-the Hashemite.
For sure.
So what happened between him and Khuri, who was a member of the National Bloc, who were less keen on
Yeah,
this
it's a
kind
good
of
question. I do have some, I mean, I've kind of been worrying about that too, because the last book was, you know, I tried to kind of tell the story of the whole region without borders. This is my goal anyway. And one of the arguments was that was the way that people would have experienced it in this post-First World War period, so that the borders were truly artificial, even mentally artificial. You know, if I keep that theme, it's a little more difficult, because once there's independence, they are borders, and then people have to be responsible for them. You can't just wish them away anymore, I guess. And then it's also a bigger book. So I haven't really, you know, I mean, but I take your point, and
Shah Bandar was killed in 1940.
He was killed in 1940. Yeah,
Iraq
so
is independent, but not Syria.
well, sort of. I mean, Iraq wasn't really independent. I mean, there was a war the next year where they, you know.
No one has really been independent.
No, but I mean, really not independent. When the British government can invade your country and, you know, and take it over and declare a military occupation.
They did in 2003.
Well, of course.
I
Absolutely.
think actually that's one of the things that should be.
I mean, the so-called Anglo-Iraqi War. You're right. I mean, I've got to write it. You're right, and I've got the material too. Yeah. I can't skip it.
Thank you.
On that positive note, let's call it a day. And thank you all again for coming. you, Professor Provence. For those of you who are interested in receiving our announcements for the upcoming sessions we have, please write your email addresses so that we can add them on our listserv, and then you'll receive the announcements when we have